Growing up, I was raised in rural Michigan. There was hardly anything to do there unless you enjoyed staring at trees, crops, and having a lot of alone time. That place was perfect for that. As soon as I got a car and enough money, I left. I'm not exactly a nature hater, but I choose a big city over that place any day. My parents don't own that property anymore. They sold it about 5 years ago, but to describe it, it was around 3 acres. The house itself was pretty big, and there was a storage building out back. I was 13 when this happened. My parents would leave me alone pretty often at this age. They trusted me because I matured early and I had responsibilities around the property. It was a weekend, and I was playing Vice City on my PS2 in the living room, when suddenly a loud metallic bang came from somewhere outside in the yard. I immediately ran to every window, trying to see what caused it. At first, I didn't see anything until I reached the window facing the storage building. The door was wide open. I went straight to the closet, grabbed the rifle, and stepped outside. I made my presence known, shouting, "Who's in there?" But no one answered. When I reached the storage building, I announced loudly that I had a gun before even looking inside. The building was full of things: the sit-down lawnmower, the quad, and countless little tools and items. Someone could have easily been hiding behind any of that stuff. Even as a kid, I didn't scare easily, but at that moment, something felt very wrong. I suddenly got really unsettled. I shut the door to the building, went back inside, locked the house door, and sat by the window watching the storage building, expecting the door to swing open again at any second. That door was heavy, couldn't open on its own. Someone had clearly opened it. Whether that person was still inside, I didn't know. I decided to call my dad. I went to the landline and dialed his cell. No answer. I left a voicemail back. Then you pretty much had to, because texting wasn't common yet. Then I went back to the window and put on a TV show just so the silence stopped messing with my brain. I took the phone with me and just waited. I was about to give up when I suddenly heard creaking sounds from upstairs. That moment, my heart jumped into my throat. Now I had to ask myself, was I working myself up, or was someone actually inside the house? Even though I didn't love living there, I had this guard dog mentality. This was our place, our property. I had to protect it. But deep down, I knew I was way in over my head. I grabbed the rifle again and started walking upstairs quietly. I didn't shout anything. I didn't want the intruder to know I heard him. At the top of the stairs, I switched on the hallway light. There were 5 doors upstairs, all closed. 4 were bedrooms and 1 was a bathroom. Each door had a pretty large gap underneath, enough to see shadows through. The creak came from the side where my parents' bedroom was. I got down on my knees and looked through the crack under the door, and that's when I saw it 2 bare feet, just standing there, facing the opposite side of the room. My stomach twisted so hard I almost felt sick. Everything suddenly became way too real. I realized I wasn't ready not to threaten someone, and definitely not to shoot someone. I got up fast, went downstairs, and locked myself inside the bathroom. I called my dad, again still no answer. I left another voicemail. Then I called again, and again, nothing. He must have left his phone somewhere. Finally, I dialed 911, something I should have done right away. I whispered the entire situation to the operator. She told me to stay inside the bathroom, stay quiet, and wait. But then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs, slowly, and then they stopped right outside the bathroom door. It was as if whoever this was knew exactly where I went. Then, a pause, followed by a deep voice saying, "What's up, kid?" I still remember that voice perfectly. If I heard it today, I would know instantly. I almost wanted to cry. That's how terrified I was. I ignored the operator's instructions. I shouted loudly that I was on the phone with the police and that I had a gun. I put the operator on speaker and she started asking if everything was okay. The man tried turning the door handle, but when he realized it was locked, he backed away. I heard footsteps fading, and then a door slammed. It was the back door. I must have let out the deepest sigh of relief. After that, I just waited for the police. When they finally arrived, it felt like £1,000,000 dropped off my shoulders. They checked the entire property inside and outside and confirmed whoever it was had already left. They asked if there was anywhere else I could stay for the night. I told them my uncle's place. My uncle came, talked to the officers, and then took me home with him. The part that still haunts me the most is that it was my fault. I could have prevented all of it. I actually left the house door unlocked when I went to check the storage building. That's when he must have walked straight into the house. Even with a rifle in my hands, I wasn't safe. It was the most horrifying experience of my entire life. I was 18 when my parents went away on a week-long anniversary trip. My sister had already moved out by then, so I was the only one left to hold down the fort. My parents' property is surrounded by woods, with a long dirt driveway leading to the road. The road itself is a quiet back road with houses spread out at long distances, giving the place an isolated feeling. In our town, everyone knows everyone. You see the same faces at the gas station, the grocery store, the bar. Something I realized more when I got older. It all started at the gas station while my parents were gone. I was filling up my tank when a black Jeep Cherokee pulled up next to me. A man with a goatee stepped out, greeted me, and started filling his tank. That was normal in our town. Strangers talked all the time. He had the nozzle locked into his car. Then he walked over to my side and asked how to get to the interstate. I gave him directions. He pulled out a notepad and wrote everything down, which was strange because anyone could just use their phone. He thanked me and asked if I was from the area. I said yes, I grew up here. He said he was from out of town, never said where. Then he asked my name, saying it was nice meeting me. I told him, my name's Kate. He smiled and said it was a lovely name. He got into his car and I got into mine. I left first and turned toward my house. A couple minutes later, when I slowed for our driveway, I noticed the car behind me was that same black Jeep Cherokee. He passed me as I turned in, going the exact opposite direction of where I told him the interstate was. I assumed maybe he forgot the directions. Later that night, when I stepped outside to meet friends, I heard footsteps in the woods. It was summertime, and the woods always had animals, so I ignored it. But when I came back home and walked to the house, I suddenly heard a man's voice coming from somewhere in the woods, whispering, "Kate." I froze, my heart dropped. I rushed inside and locked the door. All the neighbors knew my name, but the houses weren't close. And no one would call out like that from the woods without identifying themselves. I called my parents, and they said it was probably a neighbor and someone would knock eventually. I didn't tell them about the gas station man. The next night, it happened again. I stepped outside, and as I walked to my car, someone called, "Kate," louder this time. I panicked, ran inside, and immediately called 911. 2 officers searched the property with flashlights, but eventually told me to just call again if it continued. I didn't feel any better. I stayed inside until I had work the next day. I was a server at a nearby restaurant and worked a late shift. I left in daylight, didn't hear the voice, and figured maybe the police scared whoever it was. After work, I drove home ready to crash. As I parked and started walking toward the house, I heard footsteps again, this time heavier. I stopped on the porch and listened. Suddenly, the same voice yelled, "Kate, don't call the cops on me again." "Cutie!" I shouted back that he needed help and rushed inside. I called the police again. They searched again. My parents told me to stay at a friend's house, and I agreed immediately. My friend Alex told me to come over. I packed a bag, checked the windows, and finally went outside. As I got into my car and turned the key, I heard something right outside my door. A man in a face mask was trying to open it. My lungs froze. I threw the car into drive, and he started elbowing my window. I drove straight across the grass and sped off down the road, hysterically crying the entire way. When I reached Alex's house, she and her dad were on the phone trying to calm me down. We called the police together. Officers checked my parents' house again. One came to Alex's, and I gave the whole description once more. My parents came home the next day, and I finally felt safe again. I'm convinced the man from the gas station followed me home, realized I was alone, and spent days watching the house, calling my name, and waiting to grab me. I should never have told him my real name, and I should have noticed he'd followed my car that day. How some people are truly insane. This incident was one of the biggest reasons I moved into my own apartment a few months later. I was home alone one night for a reason I honestly don't remember. All I remember is that my entire family was gone, and I was about 15 or 16 at the time. Back then, I was a huge gamer, obsessed with StarCraft, and would sometimes spend entire weekend nights playing. This was right before COVID lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft in my bedroom on the first floor when the doorbell rang twice. I rushed to the door, not wanting to lose my game. I called out, "Who is it?" like I always did when I was alone. A soft, weak voice answered, sounding like a woman, but I couldn't understand what she said. I opened the main door slightly, with the storm door still separating us, and saw an older woman smiling at me. Her hands were behind her back. Through the door I asked, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. My parents had always taught me, even since I was little, never to let strangers into the house no matter who they were. I felt awkward turning her away, but I told her she could go to the library a few blocks down and they'd have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed, but I just wanted her to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next didn't match her expression at all. "That's very rude," turning away an old lady asking for help. I repeated that my parents didn't allow strangers inside and slowly began closing the door while apologizing. She didn't move. She just kept standing there, smiling. But suddenly, that smile felt a lot more threatening. When I walked back toward my room, the doorbell rang again. No way was I answering the door this time. Something was seriously off about her. Maybe she wasn't mentally all there, or maybe something worse was going on. I decided I wasn't opening the door again. I went back to my game, but not long after sitting down, I heard tapping on my bedroom window. A metallic clinking sound. My blinds were closed, but my room was the only one with a light on, so I already knew the horrible possibility. Maybe she'd walked around to my window. I turned the volume off on my game. At that point, I didn't care anymore. The tapping continued. I finally said, "Forget this," and went to a different room. I sat in the dark living room for a while. Then the doorbell rang again. She was actively harassing me at this point. I tried convincing myself maybe she was just confused, but every instinct in me felt wrong. She rang the bell a second and third time. Eventually, I decided to open the door and tell her I could call someone for Herb. When I opened it, a man was standing there instead. He looked around 10 years younger than her. Through the storm door, he asked, "Have you seen my mother?" I said yes. She came by earlier. He apologized and said she had dementia and wandered out. For a moment, I felt bad. But then he asked if he could come inside too. And immediately, something felt wrong again. Why would he need to come inside? I repeated the same thing, that I couldn't let strangers in. I told him I heard someone by my window, so maybe she went into the backyard. I told him he could check. He thanked me and walked down the pathway. I assumed he went around back. But when I looked out the back window, no one was there. Not him, not the woman. This was getting unreal. I tried going to bed early that night. I left the TV on in the background, trying to fall asleep. But soon I heard that same metallic tapping on my window again. I remembered the man supposedly looking for her. I decided to try and help. I lifted my blind with my hand and saw the old woman standing there, smiling the exact same creepy smile, tapping a kitchen knife against my window. I dropped the blind instantly and crawled into bed. This didn't feel real. Moments later, the doorbell rang over and over 4 times. The tapping stopped, but everything about this felt coordinated, like a planned robbery. I didn't answer. I stayed in bed. I didn't have a cell phone at that age, and I wasn't a social kid. And for some reason, I didn't want to call the police. Eventually, everything stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened. He said I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed it sounded like an attempted robbery. Sure, maybe she really did have dementia, and that really was her son. But how did he know she came to my house specifically? And why did he want to come inside? And why didn't he check the backyard if he was supposedly looking for her? Too many unanswered questions. I'm convinced I avoided something terrible by not opening that door. A week ago, something else happened that made me think about this again. My friend Cody asked me to watch his dog Theo for the night. Theo's a small Pomsky and barks at everything. So when he started barking at something outside, I ignored it at first. He kept barking at the back door. I figured he wanted to go out. But when I went to open the back door, the handle jerked. Someone outside was trying to open it. Through the screen, I could see a man staring at me. This was my friend's backyard, not the front. He wasn't anyone I recognized. I asked who he was, and he asked if I'd seen Melissa, Cody's younger sister. She's in her 20s. This guy looked mid-50s, dirty, drunk, homeless. I told him he needed to leave. He asked, "You sure?" I said yeah, and that there were cameras on the property. He left immediately. Later, Cody asked his sister, and she had no idea who he was. He looked like some random drunk guy, not someone she would ever know. The fact he went to the back door and tried opening it was terrifying. Can imagine what he intended if Melissa actually lived there. And that is, so many of these things could be avoided by simply keeping your doors locked. I live in a house with my sister. It's a 2-floor house, mother-daughter style house, which means it has 2 separate kitchens. My sister takes the downstairs and I take the upstairs. She isn't home very often because she usually stays with her boyfriend, who lives about 20 miles away. I'm 30 now, and technically I shouldn't be getting freaked out being home alone, but sometimes I still do. One night, I was home alone, watching a scary movie in the living room. My floor has an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are just one big space. The couch is in the middle, so whenever I sit and watch TV, my back is exposed to a huge dark space behind me. If you're someone who scares easily, you'd understand why it was in exactly the most comfortable place to be alone watching a horror movie. And honestly, I'll admit I was constantly glancing over my shoulder as I watched in the dark room with only the light from the TV. After the movie ended, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, and went to sleep. I slept for about 2 hours until suddenly I woke up around 1 a.m. at first. I didn't know why I woke up. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. Not calling me to open the door, just speaking from inside the house. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but I knew it was her voice. Still half asleep, my brain automatically assumed she must be home, maybe arguing with her boyfriend or calling my name. I got out of bed and stepped into the dark hallway. I turned on the hallway light, walked through the living room, and heard her voice again from downstairs, this time clearly saying my name. I went down the stairs in pitch darkness, calling back to her, "What is it?" I couldn't find the foyer light switch at first. I was groggy as hell, barely awake, stumbling around. I followed the sound of her voice toward her kitchen and eventually found the switch. The kitchen light turned on slowly. 'Tis one of those bulbs that starts dim and takes a moment to brighten. But even in the dim light, I could see clearly. There was no one downstairs. Not my sister, not her boyfriend. I checked her bedroom, empty. I called her name loudly. No answer. But a moment later, something dropped on the floor inside that same bedroom I had just checked. There was a clear noise, like something fell, but nobody was in there. I panicked and went upstairs like a little kid, shut myself in my room, and grabbed my phone. I tried calling her several times, but she didn't answer. I locked my door and sat there, wondering if I had imagined everything. Eventually, I fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to texts from my sister asking why I had called her around 1 a.m. I asked if she was home last night. She said no, she'd been at her boyfriend's place. I went downstairs to her room to see if anything was on the floor. Anything that could have fallen, but the floor was completely clean. Nothing out of place. I'm trying to convince myself I hallucinated the whole thing, because the alternative is much scarier. But I've never hallucinated before in my life, neither voices nor sounds, and I don't have sleep disorders. The way I heard her voice so clearly along with that sound in her room still freaks me out every time I think about it. I was left home alone a lot as a kid because my mom was a single parent for most of my childhood. She worked as an RN with a crappy schedule, and my brother had already gone off to college. One weekend night, she was working an overnight shift. I had this girl, Molly, over. We were talking for a while, watched a couple of movies, and eventually she went home because her parents didn't like her being out late, so I was alone to hold down the fort. After she left, I continued watching TV in my room. My bedroom was upstairs and right next to the backyard. At some point, I heard one of the deck chairs being dragged outside. I got up, went to the window, and saw someone sitting on one of the deck chairs below. I called out Molly's name, thinking it was her, since she had only left less than 10 minutes earlier. But when the person looked up, it wasn't Molly. I immediately pulled away from the window. I didn't recognize whoever that was, especially in the darkness. I texted a few close friends in our group chat, asking if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who replied said no and asked what I was talking about. I honestly didn't believe any of my friends would come to my house to scare me anyway. Still scared but curious, I slowly went back to the window. The person was still sitting there, staring up at my window. I could tell it was a man, and he had definitely seen me. I quickly backed away again and shut off the TV. I sat in bed, curled up, arms wrapped around my knees, waiting in complete darkness. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was afraid he would notice the light. I didn't want to move because the window was slightly open and I felt he would hear any sound. I wanted him to think I was no longer in the room. I waited what felt like a solid 5 minutes. I doubted he would still be there. When I finally built up the courage to look again, a part of me felt like it died when I saw him still sitting there, staring directly up at my window. This time, instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and asked loudly, "What do you want?" That's when I noticed his shoulders moving up and down like he was laughing really hard, but he wasn't making any actual laughing sound. I only heard a slight whistling noise, almost like he was wheezing from laughing. I asked him to please go away and backed away from the window again. I returned to my bed, terrified to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairs, listening. Then I heard the back door being pushed. He was trying to get inside the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was only 14. I had no idea what to do. After that, I heard the front doorknob being messed with. He was trying that one too. Thankfully, he gave up quickly. I closed my bedroom window and shut the curtains. If our doors hadn't been locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak at 14, definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again until my mom came home around 9 in the morning. When I told her what happened, she was angry at me for not calling 911. In hindsight, it was very stupid of me. It's one of the many things from my younger years that I look back on and question. This was the story of how I almost died as a young kid home alone, and probably the most intense night of my life because way too much was happening at once. We were a family of 5. I was 10 at the time. My older brother was 14, and my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night, and my brother was out with his friends, clearly causing trouble because a dreaded phone call came to my parents. I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game when I suddenly heard my mom start freaking out and crying. I got scared and rushed out to see what was going on. My mom was on the phone with a hospital. They were calling to inform my parents that my brother had gotten hit by a car. Obviously, we were all shaken and extremely scared. My brother's leg was broken, but I don't know what else was said on the phone. All I remember is my parents rushing to get their coats on. They grabbed my little sister from her room and asked me if I was okay staying home alone. I said yes, and they hurried out to the car and left. Of course, I was really worried for my brother, but I honestly didn't want to go to the hospital and see him in a bad condition. I don't think my parents wanted me or my sister to see that either, but they also didn't want to leave my 5-year-old sister behind. It's worth mentioning my brother recovered just fine. His injury isn't relevant to the rest of the story, except for the fact that he was the reason I was left alone that Friday night. Before my dad left, he was trying to calm my mom down and tell her my brother was going to be okay. Seeing my dad act like that made me feel a little better. I had a feeling my mom was just being overly emotional like any mom would be. I went back to playing my Star Wars game for a couple more hours until I heard the front door open. By now, my bedroom door was closed, and it was easily past midnight, well past my bedtime. I shut off the TV and PlayStation and crawled into bed with my Game Boy. I tried listening for my parents' voices, maybe to hear if my brother was with them or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes of listening and not hearing anyone come upstairs, I started feeling like something was wrong. I went to my bedroom door and slowly opened it. Then I walked over to the railing that overlooked the living room. The lights were off, but there were 3 tall people standing in the living room. They weren't my family. I was so terrified that I froze for a second before quietly walking back into my room and gently shutting the door. But it wasn't quiet enough. I knew they had to have heard the door click, even if only a little. I quickly went to my closet, quietly opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it behind me. I sat behind a bunch of boxes and bags of clothes stacked inside the closet and was surprisingly well covered from view. There was a short moment that felt like forever as I waited, anticipating my bedroom door opening, and it did. At that moment, I genuinely thought I was going to die. I heard footsteps enter the room. I couldn't tell how many people there were. It might have been 1. It might have been 2. I heard the footsteps go toward my bed, and I heard someone moving the covers around. Then silence. Then more footsteps came toward the closet door, followed by another long silence. And then the closet door opened. My heart was in my throat. All I could do was sit perfectly still and hold my breath. The door stayed open for what felt like a really long time, at least 20 seconds, but I didn't look up. I didn't move. Eventually, the door closed again and the footsteps walked away and out of the room. When I finally looked up, I realized from where I was crouched behind the boxes, I actually might have been visible. It took probably an hour before I finally heard my parents return. I ran downstairs to them. The front door was left partially open by the people who had broken into our house. They had stolen a number of valuables. It was a night that went from bad to worse for my family. My parents had been in such a rush going to the hospital that they apparently didn't even lock the door. I was extremely lucky that I wasn't killed or kidnapped. Looking back now, I constantly wonder if the person who opened the closet and just stood there for 20 seconds actually saw me hiding there. Maybe he was just a robber who didn't care about hurting a child. Maybe he didn't notice me at all, and I narrowly escaped death or serious harm. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents didn't go out a lot. My mom's rich friend Patty invited my parents on a trip that she was paying for. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in Newark, Ohio, which is in Licking County. Yes, our county was literally called Licking County. My parents' old house had woods in the backyard and was located on a quiet road that only a few cars passed each day. We had a huge deck overlooking the woods and a decently large backyard. We even had a little fish pond and an above-ground swimming pool. It was a Thursday night. I remember clearly because earlier that day I'd been making weekend plans with some friends. This was in July of 2013. I was out on the deck, smoking weed with music playing from my speaker. That's when it started. I thought I heard a voice coming from out in the woods. I lowered the music and listened for a few seconds. It didn't repeat, so I turned the volume back up. But when the music was loud again, I heard the voice again. This time I turned the music off completely and listened longer. There was a voice calling from the woods again, male, saying, "Hey, over here." He sounded distant, but not that far. The woods were like 20 to 30 yards away from the deck, and the voice was coming exactly from that direction. I didn't think for a second it was directed at me though. Maybe just some kids playing manhunt or something. But then the voice called again. "Hey, over here, we need help." His voice was way too deep to be a kid, and anytime someone yells they need help, obviously that's concerning. Now I was feeling uncomfortable because I started wondering if the yelling really was directed at me. Then I heard the voice yell, "Straight in front of you, please come help us." And now it was definitely coming from the woods directly in front of me. I reluctantly called back, "Who is that?" He responded, "We just need help. We're stuck in the woods." I called back, "What does that mean?" Then the voice said, "Just please come help, straight in front of you." I got up from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck, onto the grass, and cautiously walked toward the woods. I called, "I'm coming. Where are you?" The voice replied instantly, "Right in front of you, I see you." I replied, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" But this time, there was no answer. I stopped walking, about halfway to the woods, and suddenly I had a terrible gut feeling. I slowly started backing up toward the house and the deck. I didn't even want to turn my back to the woods. It took me that long to realize something was extremely suspicious. I made it back to the deck. The voice didn't say anything else. If this person could really see me and needed help, they would have at least asked why I was going back. Whoever it was probably realized I was onto them. I had no clue how many people were in there. Could have been one, could have been three. And honestly, getting stuck in the woods made no sense at all. If they could literally see me, what were they stuck on? A branch. I went inside and locked all the doors just to be safe. I chilled in the living room for a while, still high, and honestly, that's probably why at first I was more trusting. Then I heard the voice again, this time much closer, definitely in the backyard and no longer in the woods. I heard splashing in the water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I hurried to the window. I didn't see anyone at first, but then the voice called, "I see you," with a laugh. I finally saw him, at least one guy that I could see. He was hidden behind the pool on the other side, and I could only see his head. It was too dark to make out anything except his medium-length dark hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. Maybe he would lose interest if he realized I wasn't responding anymore. He was probably some sick person who enjoyed messing with random people, so I didn't want to give him any reaction. But my breaking point came when he suddenly started aggressively banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, screaming, "Help!" I screamed back as loud as I could, "F***, off you freak, the police are coming." I kept yelling it over and over, trying to sound crazier than him. I heard him laughing from the other side of the glass. His laughing slowly faded, like he was walking away. I sat back down on the couch, shaking, out of breath, completely terrified. I sat there for a long time, and eventually it seemed like he had really left. I still got a good night's sleep because weed helps me sleep, but I wonder how differently I would have reacted if I wasn't high. That night made me a lot more paranoid about who I opened the door to. I'm 23 years old, and I still live at home with my parents. One day, they were both not home, and I was outside playing basketball in the front yard. At some point while I was playing, I looked up toward one of our upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. She wasn't my mom. She wasn't my sister. She was a random woman. I guess when she realized I was looking at her, she quickly moved away from the window. When I went inside and headed upstairs to check the lounge room, she wasn't anywhere. I checked every single room I could, the bedrooms, the bathroom, every closet. Then I checked the downstairs, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one bedroom, and more closets. Finally, I checked the basement. I highly doubted she would be down there. It's a small basement with a couple couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places anyone could hide. When I opened the second closet door, I felt incredibly scared because this was the last possible place I could think of where someone could be hiding. I yanked the door open like ripping off a Band-Aid, and just like with the closet before this one, I pushed myself inside immediately just in case that woman was there and I could get the jump on her. But all I pushed myself into was a bunch of coats and hangers. I was confused. I definitely saw a woman, and I knew what I saw. It wasn't something a person would just vividly imagine. I went back to the middle floor and screamed out loud that whoever was in the house needed to get the F out. I screamed so loud that our next-door neighbor came over and asked if I was okay. I told him that I literally saw a woman at one of our upstairs windows watching me play basketball. He came inside and helped me search again. When we still couldn't find her, I assumed she must be snuck out through the back door, which I had unlocked earlier when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. So my neighbor left. I locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the whole crazy story. They weren't too thrilled, but they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I checked everything and nothing seemed to be missing. So later that night, I went to sleep after checking the house one more time just for peace of mind. It was hard to fall asleep because my mind was racing. Most people can't relate to seeing a stranger at their window inside their house. But my restlessness ended up helping me. I was finally starting to drift off when I heard noises coming from the other side of me. I had the fan on, so the room wasn't completely silent, and that's probably why I didn't react immediately. But the noises started sounding more human-like. I turned over, and there she was, getting out from under my bed. She stood up tall above the bed, and I screamed louder than I had earlier. I jumped out of bed, tackled her to the floor, and had my hand around her throat, demanding to know who she was. The doorbell rung. It was my neighbor again. I picked this tall, dirty-looking woman up off the floor and dragged her with me toward the front door. She was struggling and scratching at me. I still have 2 scars on my right arm from her nails. I opened the door, and my neighbor came in and helped me restrain her. That's when I called the police. The whole time we waited, the woman screamed and cursed at us, threatening us. The best way to describe her, she looked and acted like a meth head suffering withdrawals. When the police arrived, one of the officers immediately recognized her. They had dealt with her many times before. Her name, conveniently, was Karen. It was satisfying watching her being put into the back of the police car. I thanked my neighbor for showing up so fast. That night, my mind kept racing. But instead of being completely terrified, which I still was, I felt this strange sense of satisfaction. And honestly, I can't fully explain why. This all happened last fall, in the first week or 2 of October. I'm not entirely sure how to start because it all happened completely out of the blue. It was a normal Monday afternoon. I got off work and pulled up to my home just after sunset. Usually, I park in the garage and head inside from there. But as I pulled in, I noticed something hanging on the front door. So instead, I parked in the driveway and went up to see what it was. Taped right to the door handle was an envelope. I knew immediately it wasn't some random soliciting mail because it had my name handwritten with a pen on the front. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter. It was short, but what it said I found pretty disturbing. Essentially, the person mentioned that they'd been interested in me and wanted to meet at a specific place and time the following day. Oddly, that happened to be one of my days off work, but I figured that was just a coincidence. The writer didn't sign it, so I had no idea who it was. Obviously, there was no way I was going anywhere to meet with a random person. I headed inside, tore up the letter, and tossed it in the trash. It was disturbing because they knew my name and address and said they were interested in me. Yet I had no idea who they even were. I thought tearing up the letter might help me not stress too much, assuming it could just be some stupid prank. I went on with my night and got in bed just before 11 o'clock. Since I was off the next day, I slept in and spent most of the day inside. I can't even remember what I did, but I made dinner late, around 8 or 9 p.m., and started getting ready for bed. I went upstairs to the bedroom for a long, relaxing shower. A little ways into the shower, I heard the doorbell ring. Confused about who could be at my home at that time, I opened the curtain and listened, but there was nothing. I figured they had left. I wouldn't have answered anyway. I closed the curtain and tried to continue relaxing. But as I stood in the water, I started connecting the dots between the letter from yesterday and the odd doorbell ring. The uneasy feeling kept growing with every passing minute. Then I heard something light thuds or creaks somewhere just outside the shower curtain. I froze, listened, quickly shut off the shower, and moved the curtain aside. Nothing was there. Phi. My heart was racing as I got out, dried off, and got dressed. The first thing I felt I had to do was check the front door. I crept downstairs and looked through the peephole, but no one was standing outside. I opened the door, and a paper slipped from the crease in the door. Before reaching down to grab it, I looked around. The trees rustled in the wind, crickets chirped, and the neighborhood was eerily quiet. I picked up the paper, closed the door, and unfolded it. It was a note in the same handwriting as the previous letter. My blood ran cold as I read it. The writer was clearly angry that I missed the meet. At the end of the letter, they signed their initials, DN. This was much more personal and unsettling than just a small prank. I had no idea who he was. I paced around my living room for at least 30 minutes, constantly checking windows and doors, feeling watched even though I saw nothing. Eventually, I knew I had to sleep. I decided to take the letter to the police in the morning. As I reached the top of the stairs, I suddenly heard those same thumping or creaking sounds from inside the bedroom. I hurried and nothing. I locked the bedroom door and checked the closet and other spots in the room for reassurance. Just before getting in bed, I remembered a small balcony attached to the master bedroom. I often forgot about it because I kept the blinds closed. I walked over, pushed aside the blinds, and went to the door handle. The door was already unlocked. There was no way I had left it that way. Before I could even open it, a figure moved from the corner of the balcony. My eyes met his as he moved closer along the door's other side. I jolted back and sprinted out of the bedroom. I heard the balcony door open as I was leaving. I ran to the nearest neighbor I knew would help. I couldn't find the man, but the police were at my house within 10 minutes, searching around. Unfortunately, they never found him. Going over the timeline, it's clear he likely broke in while I was in the shower. The sounds I heard were probably him opening and closing the balcony door as he went to hide. The same sounds while I paced later confirmed he had gone back inside the house at some point, which explains the strong feeling of being watched. Most unsettling of all, from the brief glimpse I got, he looked oddly familiar. Someone I knew, but maybe someone I'd seen in passing. I can't figure out when or where, which makes the whole situation far more disturbing. It could have been a chance encounter at a store, but apparently it was enough for him to follow me, stalk me, and form a dangerous fixation. A lot more could have happened that night, and I can only be thankful I got away mostly unharmed. I was driving from LA all the way back to the East Coast. I had gone there to see a bunch of friends for a wedding and ended up staying over a week. Because I stayed longer than planned, I only had 4 days to get back home before my next shift at work. So I was really pushing it with how long I was driving. It was around 1 a.m. and my eyes were killing me. It felt like my eyelids weighed 100 pounds. The only caffeine I had was a gas station coffee from 3 hours earlier, which wasn't even hot anymore. I was in the middle of nowhere, a dead highway with nothing on either side and barely any cars around. Occasionally, a car would speed past me and disappear down the road seconds later. As I tried to keep my eyes open, I noticed headlights coming up behind me again. They weren't very bright, so it must have been an older car without the newer LED headlights. It was also going a lot slower than the others. After tailing me for a minute, it finally merged into the other lane as if to pass. I focused on staying in my lane, but after a while of it not actually passing, I looked to my left. The car was matching my speed right beside me, an old, dusty, dark red car. The window was down and I could see only one man inside. He was staring at me. My window was up, so I couldn't be sure if he could actually see me, but he was clearly looking right at my window, as if he could. He didn't try to hide it either. Its interior light was on, making him visible. He looked red-eyed and kind of drunk based on his expression and movements, but he stayed exactly beside me and just stared. It freaked me out. I slowed down and he slowed down too. I slowed down even more, and again he matched my speed. So then I slowed down absurdly, down to about 25 on the highway, and finally he didn't T-copy me. He held his pace and kept going. He disappeared down the road a minute later. A couple minutes later, I was back to struggling to stay awake. I knew I needed caffeine and maybe a short rest. 15 minutes later, I exited into a tiny rest stop, just bathrooms and a coffee machine. No other cars were there. I parked and walked to the machine, got another coffee, hoping it would help. By the time I headed back to my car, another vehicle pulled in. Instantly, I saw it was the same old red car. I froze. I had never passed him, at least not that I noticed, and there was nowhere else to pull off. For him to pull in behind me like that, he would have had to pull into the grass way off the highway and wait for me to pass. Otherwise, I would have seen him. I got into my car and checked my mirrors. He didn't park behind me. He pulled up right beside me again, just like before. I could feel him staring. When I looked, sure enough, that's exactly what he was doing. Those same unsettling red eyes focused straight on me. I started the car, but he yelled something, trying to get my attention through the window. I looked again. He reached over and opened his passenger door, motioning for me to get in, wearing this disturbingly friendly expression. I started to pull away, and as I glanced over one last time, his expression instantly shifted into a dead stare. I got back onto the highway, but he followed. He kept trying to match my lane and speed, just like before. This time, I wasn't having it. I drove more aggressively, trying to keep him from getting close, but he matched me, also getting more aggressive. I could have sworn he even tried to pit maneuver me several times, but I braked just fast enough each time. Eventually, I saw one of those emergency U-turn spots. In a split-second decision, I cut across into it before he could react. As I got onto the other side, going the opposite direction, I watched my mirrors. For a second, his brake lights turned on, but then they faded out as he kept going the other way. I was shaking for the next hour. I finally found a gas station and just took a long break, trying to calm down and put distance between me and that guy. During that time, I sent in a police tip, mostly saying I thought the guy was just a drunk driver being dangerous, but nothing really came of it. 4 days later, after I'd finally gotten home, I looked up if police had caught any drunk drivers on that highway. I thought I might find his mugshot or something, but what I found made everything feel way more disturbing. A day before I left LA, a person disappeared on that same highway. Their car was found abandoned in the grass, and the person was just gone. No trace. The only clue was a witness report. Someone saw a rusty red car driving erratically around the missing person's vehicle shortly before it was found. Reading that case felt like déjà vu. It was exactly what I experienced, except I made it out. And the thought that things could have gone any other way, that I could have disappeared too, is something that still gets to me every time I think about that night. This past winter, I rented a cabin in the northeast part of Washington state for a week. It was designed specifically for the cold season so people could enjoy the winter scenery in the mountains, something regular. 3-season cabins weren't built for. When I first arrived, there was no snowfall. But by the time I woke up after my first night, a heavy storm had already started. It snowed so much that I basically just spent the whole day cozy inside. The fireplace and the rustic atmosphere actually made it really relaxing. Around 9 p.m., I got tired and was ready for bed, but I remembered I had left a bag in my car. I put on my jacket and shoes, opened the front door, and instantly noticed the snow on the porch had been disturbed. Something or someone had been standing there. When I stepped out farther, I realized they were footprints, and I could even see the mark from their boots. I tried to see where they came from, but the trail disappeared toward the woods. Whoever it was never knocked, and I never heard anything. I just grabbed my bag, went back inside, and tried not to think too much about it. For the next 2 days, nothing much changed. I mostly sat by the fireplace, enjoying the quiet. But every now and then, I would check out side end each time I found fresh footprints leading up to the porch and going back in the same direction. Always the same path. On the third day, curiosity finally got the better of me. I put on a heavy coat and followed the direction the footprints always went. But after walking into the woods a bit, everything just blended into white nothingness. The snow had covered anything that might have been a trail, and the falling snow was already starting to cover my own tracks behind me. It was far too easy to get lost, so I turned around and went back. Strangely, after that little attempt to follow the tracks, no new footprints showed up at all for the rest of the day. It felt like whoever had been coming by realized I was trying to find them and decided to stay away. At least, that's what I hoped. Later that night, everything was quiet, except for the soft sound of snow and the crackling fireplace. I eventually went to bed around midnight and fell asleep fast. I must have been out for a few hours when something woke me. At first, I just heard the wind and the snow, but faintly, barely noticeably, heard another sound. A slow crunch, like someone stepping in the snow, one careful step at a time. If I hadn't already been suspicious about the footprints, I don't think I would have recognized it. I sat up. I was nervous, but strangely calm, almost overconfident I could handle whatever was out there. That confidence turned out to be foolish. After a minute, the footsteps stopped somewhere near the back wall of the cabin, close to the fireplace. I got up and walked into the dark hallway. There were no built-in lights, so the whole hallway was pitch black. And the moment I stepped into it, all that fake confidence disappeared. A feeling of something very wrong hit me all at once. Still, I walked all the way down the hall toward the living room. Just as I reached the front door, there was a loud thump behind me. I spun around and saw a dark human figure rushing through the shadows, charging straight toward me. I ran to the front door, grabbed my keys, and bolted outside barefoot. I jumped into my car, but the windshield was completely covered in snow. I couldn't see anything. I didn't know if the person was behind me or directly in front of the car. Luckily, the back windshield was mostly clear, so I reversed out and sped down the snowy driveway. I called the police, but it took over an hour for someone to show up. By then, new snowfall had already buried any fresh footprints, so nobody could even figure out where the intruder went. Later, after investigating, the police found a window near the fireplace that had been forced open. Most likely, the person had been inside the cabin while I was asleep, checking rooms quietly, one by one. The only other bedroom besides mine was the farthest one down the hall, which is probably where they went first. And by total luck, I happened to leave my room at the perfect moment, giving me a chance to run. If they had chosen my room first, there would have been nowhere for me to go. It's honestly terrifying how those few seconds made the difference between escaping and being trapped face to face with whoever that was.